I can still hear it, the laugh. Not just the sound of it, but the way it sliced through everything I thought I knew. It was sharp, dismissive, too loud for what I'd said, and too cruel to be forgotten. I'd asked for a 10% raise. That's it. After 8 years of turning Westmere Holdings into the logistical powerhouse it had become, after redesigning their freight algorithms from scratch and streamlining the supply chains that bloated their profit margins, after working through holidays and pulling double shifts when deadlines loomed, I asked, quietly, respectfully, for a raise. A 10% bump. Not a throne, not a crown, just a reflection of value, of worth. I had rehearsed it all morning, kept it tight, concise. No emotion. Facts, metrics, performance data. I even printed the analytics summaries. Westmere's turnaround time had decreased by 41% since I stepped in, delivery error rates dropped below 1%, and client retention had reached an all-time high. Numbers didn't lie. That's what I told myself. But I forgot something. Numbers don't lie, but powerful men don't listen. The boardroom was quiet when I made the request. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck as I slid the folder forward. I believe my performance warrants a revised compensation structure, I said. A 10% adjustment. I'm willing to renegotiate scope and take on expanded oversight to reflect the change. There was a pause. One heartbeat. Then two. Then Douglas Wren laughed. Loud and long. The kind of laugh that makes people unsure if they should join in. Some did. Some didn't. It didn't matter. Because the damage had already been done. His voice echoed in that cold glass box of a room, bouncing off polished walls and designer light fixtures like it had been waiting to humiliate me. Try elsewhere, he chuckled, shaking his head as if I'd told the punchline of a joke. He didn't even open the folder. 10%, he repeated, savoring it. Cute. What cut deeper than his words was the silence that followed. No one challenged him. No one asked to review my report. No one even shifted in their seats. And Celia, my wife, his daughter, sat 2 seats away, spine straight, lips tight, gaze fixed on the marble table. She didn't say a thing, not a word, not even a glance in my direction. I felt something hollow out inside me in that moment, like a slow, silent cave-in behind the ribs. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was clarity, a chilling kind of awareness that slithered up the back of my neck and told me the truth. I was never one of them. Not really. Not in this room. Not in this family. I was tolerated, utilized, convenient, married in and handed a position that everyone assumed I was lucky to have. But they had no idea. They had no idea the systems I had built didn't begin here. They had no idea that the things they leaned on, automations, routing software, predictive scheduling tools, came from me, not from Westmere. From the hours I put in long after everyone else went home. On my own laptop, at my kitchen table. They didn't ask how I did it. They just took it. Because I was loyal. Because I married into the name. They assumed I wouldn't walk away. That I couldn't. I sat there in the conference room, not blinking, not moving, as Douglas continued the meeting like nothing had happened. My face didn't show anything. No humiliation. No heat. I just nodded once, quietly closed the folder, and folded my hands. The rest of the hour blurred into muffled voices and charts and projections I couldn't focus on. All I could see was Celia's profile, her face carved in stillness, as never meeting mine. And I realized something else. Maybe she believed it too. That I didn't deserve to ask. That I should have known my place. By the time the meeting ended, I had made a decision. Not out of spite. Not out of emotion. But out of certainty. I wasn't going to fight them for respect anymore. I wasn't going to justify myself or beg for a seat at a table that was designed to shrink me. I stood slowly, tucking the folder under my arm. As I turned to leave, Douglas clapped a hand on my shoulder. No hard feelings, huh? He said, still smiling. We value your work, son. Of course, I said with a calm he mistook for submission. No hard feelings at all. But as I walked out of that boardroom, I wasn't the same man who had walked in. Something in me had been rewritten. That laugh, it didn't just humiliate me. It rewired me, lit a fuse that had been waiting too long in silence. They thought they'd reminded me of my place, but all they really did was show me the door, and I had every intention of walking through it, because I had already built the blueprint for my future. Quietly, thoroughly, privately. They laughed because they thought I had nothing but this job, this title, their approval. They didn't realize I'd been preparing for this moment all along. And this was only the beginning. The house was quiet when I got home that night. Celia didn't come back with me. Said she had work to finish at her father's estate. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The silence between us had grown roots. Deep ones. We used to talk about everything. Her cases, my systems, where we wanted to travel. Now, even the air between us felt transactional. Polite. Distant. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I walked through the living room, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. My shoes came off next. Then the jacket. My tie loosened like it didn't want to be part of me anymore. I moved on instinct, right past the kitchen, past the dining room, down the hallway to the den I'd converted into an office 5 years ago. That room knew the truth better than anyone else. I opened the bottom drawer of the bookshelf and pulled out the old black notebook. Leather-bound, spine slightly cracked from years of thumbing through it, the corners curling from use. I laid it gently on the desk like a surgeon prepping for a delicate operation. It didn't look like much, just scribbles, columns of numbers, diagrams of flowcharts, process maps. But this notebook was the reason Westmere became what it was. And they never even knew it. Most people in the company assumed I was just good at implementing tools already out there. Some thought I used a team to draft models behind the scenes. They had no idea every algorithm used in the Renware suite came from this notebook. Every routing adjustment that saved the millions. Every scheduling module that cut costs. Every projection system that doubled their quarterly fulfillment. It was all born here, on weekends, late nights, coffee-fueled early mornings when I couldn't sleep and needed to work out an idea. At first, it had been passion. Then it became habit. Then it became the silent backbone of Westmere Holdings. They never asked who owned it. They just assumed it belonged to them. But they were wrong. The truth was that none of these models had ever been formally sold to Westmere. I had built them off the clock, at home, and not a single one had been transferred to the company under any legal acquisition. I had even offered a few times to license the software properly. I still had the emails. Let's circle back to this next quarter. Regina Hahn, Westmere's legal counsel, had replied once. That next quarter never came. They preferred to use the tools without paying for them. Why bother? I was family. I'd never leave. Their arrogance became my leverage. I sat down and flipped open the first few pages, tracing the timelines. Each system had an origin date, a build phase, beta testing data. I used a system of initials and color-coded tabs to track version control. I'd always been obsessive like that. Some called it neurotic. I called it insurance. The deeper I flipped, the angrier I felt, not with them, but with myself. I had given too much, too freely. I had built an empire under their name, believing the proximity to power was the same as possessing it. But I was done trading brilliance for breadcrumbs. I opened my laptop and began scanning pages into a secure drive, categorizing everything, routing algorithms, smart inventory balancing, automated carrier bidding templates. Each document was labeled, timestamped, encrypted. I backed everything up twice, external SSD and a remote encrypted cloud vault. If they wanted to challenge me down the line, they'd learn I didn't move impulsively. I moved strategically. When I reached the section titled Predictive Freight Demand, Gen 3, I paused. That was the crown jewel. Westmere had implemented a trimmed version of this 2 years ago. The version they had could predict shipping trends about 10 days out. But this version saw 30 days ahead. Combined with real-time data feeds, it was like giving a logistics firm a crystal ball. The next iteration was nearly done, and it didn't belong to them. It never had. My phone buzzed. A message from Celia. Still at the estate. Don't wait up. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than I should have. There was no apology in her message. No acknowledgement of what happened in the boardroom. Maybe she thought it would blow over. Maybe she thought I would just take the insult and stay quiet. She didn't know who I'd become in that room. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care anymore. I placed the notebook gently back on the desk, opened my email, and clicked through old folders. There it was, the white paper I'd written years ago, redefining velocity in freight distribution. I'd published it anonymously in a niche logistics journal. A few industry folks had reached out afterward. One name stood out, Julian Moreland, CEO of Redwood Logistics. I'd saved his email. He had written, "Brilliant work. If you're ever ready to have your name attached to your ideas, reach out. I'd like to meet the mind behind the curtain." That was 3 years ago. At the time, I wasn't interested. I believed in loyalty, in building legacy from within. But tonight, I realized that loyalty without respect was servitude, and I wasn't going to keep serving men who smirked while I spoke. I reopened the email thread and started typing. Julian, not sure if you remember me. I'm ready to have my name attached. Are you still interested in meeting? I stared at the message for a beat, then hit send. It was late, almost 2 in the morning, but sleep wouldn't come. I stayed at my desk, watching the screen, the blue light painting my face in quiet resolve. I didn't know what Julian would say, but I knew one thing for certain: Westmere's greatest asset had just decided to walk. And they had no idea he owned the road he was about to take. Julian Moreland replied within 4 hours. His message was short, but the tone came through clear. Still interested. Let's meet. Tonight? My treat. Bring your appetite and your ideas. He suggested Magnolia House, a restaurant tucked into the east side of the city, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself with neon signs or Instagrammable interiors. It was legacy and subtlety, reputation without noise. Douglas Wren would never step foot in a place like that. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he'd never heard of it, and that alone made it unworthy in his eyes. That's what made it perfect. I wore a simple navy button-up, slacks, nothing flashy. No tie. I wasn't there to impress anyone. Not anymore. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the candlelit front lounge. The air smelled of saffron and something charred, meat, probably. The hostess approached me twice, offering water, a drink. I declined both. My mind wasn't here for food. It was here for strategy. Julian arrived with the kind of quiet confidence that made everyone else in the room adjust without knowing why. Tall, but not looming. Salt in his beard, but fire in his eyes. He extended a hand and smiled like we'd known each other for years. Mr. Wren, or do you prefer something else now? He asked as we sat down. I let out a dry chuckle. Let's go with what comes next. For now, just call me Cole. He nodded. Fair enough. Cole it is. The waiter came and Julian ordered without asking for a menu. Apparently, he was a regular. I barely glanced at mine. I wasn't sure I'd eat much. Julian noticed. Don't worry, he said. This is more than a dinner. Think of it as a soft handshake before the real conversation begins. I nodded once. Understood. We talk logistics. Industry trends, the shrinking margins in freight, the inflation of talent acquisition costs. But it didn't take long before he leaned forward, laced his fingers together, and said, Tell me what you've really got. I know Westmere didn't do what it did without someone pulling smarter strings behind the scenes. That someone's you. So, what exactly are we discussing here tonight? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 3 laminated sheets. No labels, no titles, just flow diagrams. Predictive modeling outlines. Forecasting tiers. Things only someone deep in this world would recognize. Julian's eyes lit up like a man reading a map to buried treasure. You built these. From the ground up, I said. All outside of company hours. All mine. And Westmere's using them? They're using watered-down versions I let them have for free, I said flatly. They never purchased formal rights. Never paid royalties. I offered, quietly. They declined. He whistled low. You must really love your wife. Did, I said. Now? I'm not sure what I love more, freedom or the fire this betrayal lit under me. Julian smiled like a man who recognized the exact shape of revenge. Well, let's talk about freedom. I followed your work for a while, even before I knew who was behind it. You built Westmere's rise, but they made sure your name never touched a single press release. You ready for that to change? I didn't blink. I'm beyond ready. He leaned back, nodding. Here's my offer. You come on as Redwood's Chief Architecture Officer. You'll lead all system innovations full authority. You want your own team? Handpick them. You want stock? I'll give you 2% equity up front, with quarterly vesting. You want your name on the patents? Done. You'll be the architect, not the builder who gets thanked in footnotes. It was more than I'd expected. Not just the money, though triple my current salary wasn't nothing, but the power, the recognition, the ownership. He was offering me my identity back. Julian paused, watching me. Take your time. I'm not a man who rushes genius. I didn't need time. I reached into my briefcase again and slid a preliminary version of my proprietary system, Project Horizon, across the table. I'll sign an MU tonight. A formal contract can follow, but I want a clause added, which is freedom to recruit talent from anywhere, including Westmere. He grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. We ate. Or rather, He did. I mostly pushed steak around the plate and tried not to think about Celia. Not about her silence in the boardroom. Not about the message she hadn't sent since I left. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about what I had built and what I would build now that the restraints were gone. Julian raised his glass toward the end of the meal. To being underestimated, he said. I clinked my water against his wine. And to what comes next. We walked out together. He offered to send a car, but I declined. I wanted to walk. Wanted to feel my heels against the pavement, grounded and deliberate. I didn't rush. I let the night wrap around me like armor. By the time I got home, Celia's car was gone. No note. No message. Just silence. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. Not anymore. I walked into my office, placed the signed MOU on my desk, and opened the notebook again. This time, I smiled as I flipped through it. For the first time, these pages wouldn't be filtered through someone else's legacy. For the first time, the work, and the name attached to it, would be mine. Celia's family dinners were always events dressed up as tradition. Ren Wednesdays, they called them. Same seats, same servers, same rooftop view of the city skyline. Everything choreographed. Crystal glasses where no one drank more than a third, laughter that never reached the eyes, and compliments disguised as dominance. Douglas Wren, my father-in-law, took the head of the table like it was carved for him. Always the loudest voice, always the one to toast, always with a speech at the end as if the boardroom didn't follow him into the dining room. Celia sat 2 seats down from him. I was across from her, always across. Like even the table knew I wasn't one of them. I used to smile through these dinners. Not when I was supposed to. Laugh at his rehearsed jokes. Raise my glass to achievements I had quietly made possible but was never named for. But tonight was different. I wasn't there to belong. I was there to end it. We arrived together, Celia and me, but didn't say much in the elevator. Her perfume was expensive, understated, like everything about her. She looked stunning, but distant. Her gaze didn't linger on me, not even once. I wondered if she knew. If she had sensed the shift in me, felt it rising beneath the silence of our last few weeks. She didn't ask why I was carrying a sealed envelope in my blazer. She didn't ask much of anything anymore. The dining room staff welcomed us with that polished, over-practiced warmth that luxury breeds. I sat down, greeted Douglas with the usual evening, sir, and took my place. I sipped from the wine he liked, complimented the duck confit even though it tasted like ash in my mouth, and waited until the second course was served. The timing mattered. I wanted the room full. I wanted witnesses. Not out of pettiness, but for clarity. So there'd be no confusion about what I said or who I said it to. The clinking of silverware dulled for a moment as I reached into my blazer and pulled out the envelope. Douglas looked up mid-chew, amused, as though expecting a birthday card. What's this? He asked, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a cloth napkin. My resignation, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Celia's fork slipped and hit her plate with a sharp clatter. Douglas stopped chewing. The amusement drained from his face, replaced by a flash of confusion that quickly calcified into prideful dismissal. Excuse me, he said, as if the words couldn't register. I placed the envelope in front of him, centered it on the white linen. Effective in 2 weeks. I'll submit the formal transition documents to HR tomorrow. I've already made a list of my responsibilities for reassignment. The silence was loud. Knives hovered midair. No one reached for bread. Across the table, Celia didn't look at me. Not in shock. Not in anger. Just nothing. That absence hurt more than I thought it would. Douglas slowly pushed back in his chair, arms folded. You're joking. You told me to try elsewhere, I said evenly. I did. A few of the cousins blinked, unsure if they should be impressed or horrified. Celia's mother cleared her throat, but didn't speak. I glanced around the table, locking eyes with each of them, not for effect, but so they'd remember. Remember I didn't yell, didn't flinch. I just walked out with my spine straight and my pride intact. Douglas scoffed. Do you understand what you're walking away from? Yes, I said. I do. You're throwing away your future. No, I said calmly. I'm reclaiming it. The waiter arrived to pour wine and froze mid-step, unsure whether to proceed. I waved him off gently. The poor kid didn't need to be part of this. You think you can do better? Douglas asked, but the edge in his voice was brittle now. That someone else will give you what we gave you? I'm not interested in what's given anymore, I replied. I'm interested in what's earned. He looked at Celia then, searching for backup, for outrage, for a shared look of contempt that could stabilize the table. But she just sipped her water. Not a flicker of protest. Maybe she was in shock. Or maybe, just maybe, she had nothing left to say because she knew what this family had taken from me. I stood up, buttoned my blazer. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "And for the years I spent in service to Westmere. They were not wasted. They were just misdirected." I turned to leave. Douglas called out, "You won't be welcomed back." I paused only long enough to respond. "That's the idea." I walked out of the restaurant with my hands loose at my sides, my pulse calm. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. Because power doesn't come from volume, it comes from certainty. And I had never been more certain than in that moment. I had spent 8 years building someone else's legacy. Now, I would build my own. Outside, the wind off the rooftops was cold against my skin. My phone buzzed. A message from Julian. "Everything still on track?" I typed back. Resignation delivered. No fireworks. Just silence. The best kind. His reply came a moment later. "Perfect. Let me know when you're ready to finalize team structure. We're clearing a floor for your division." I looked back once at the glass tower behind me. The dining room was still glowing from within, forks picking up again, wine being refilled. The machine of the Wren family turning on without a hitch, as if nothing had happened. And maybe to them, it hadn't. But to me, everything changed. Not because I left, but because I finally chose myself. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small walking away from that table. I felt taller. I walked into HR the next morning with the calm of someone who knew he was untouchable. No rage, no righteousness, just order, timing, and facts. The kind of clarity that shakes people more than shouting ever could. Madison, the HR director, stood as I entered, nervous smile stretched a little too tight across her face. "Cole, hi. We got your resignation," she said, gesturing toward the conference room already prepped for this exit meeting. Legal folders, 2 cups of coffee, and a nervous junior associate who wouldn't meet my eyes. They thought I was another disgruntled exec they'd smooth over with paperwork and exit pleasantries. They were wrong. I took my seat, opened my briefcase, and placed 2 things on the table, the worn black notebook and a printed copy of my original employment contract. The notebook looked like nothing, but it was everything. They just didn't know it yet. "We've prepared your final off-boarding documents," Madison began. "Standard terms. Severance, benefits carryover, NDA, and of course the non-compete agreement you signed at onboarding." I leaned forward slightly, voice calm. "I won't be signing a non-compete." Her mouth parted slightly. "Well, you already did." I slid the contract across the table and pointed to the onboarding section. "Read it. Page 14, supposed to be the clause about future industry limitations. Notice anything missing?" She scanned it quickly, then passed it to the legal associate. His brow furrowed. He flipped back and forth, looked at me, then back at Madison. "There's no non-compete language in this version." "Exactly," I said. "It was never included. I never signed one." "That's unusual," Madison said, trying to keep her tone professional, but her voice was already cracking. "We always include. You must have missed it," I replied, with just enough edge to let it land. Or assumed I wouldn't notice. The associate cleared his throat. "Even so, intellectual property developed during employment." I cut him off by sliding the notebook toward them. "Stop. Before you speak again, I suggest you read this." He looked confused, then opened it. At first, it probably looked like nonsense. Algorithms, systems, process maps, and color-coded tags. Then his expression changed. I saw it in real time, the dawning realization that these weren't just notes. This was the skeleton of Westmere's success. The routing matrix on page 9 alone was worth millions. And it was dated, months before I ever officially pitched anything to the company. "These are your designs?" he asked, eyes wide. "Yes. Developed off the clock. At home. On personal equipment. None of it was formally transferred or acquired by Westmere. In fact, I emailed legal twice over the years offering to license this material." I slid a printed copy of one of those emails across the table. "Regina Hahn responded to this one. Let's revisit next quarter." "You never did." They both stared at the evidence. The silence in the room stretched. "So," I continued, "you will not be enforcing a non-compete, and any attempt to restrict my employment based on these innovations will be met with a formal countersuit." The associate started to speak, then thought better of it. I watched as he flipped pages, checking dates, checking metadata notations I'd handwritten with timestamps. His fingers were trembling slightly. The corporate mask was slipping. "I'll need to escalate this," he finally muttered. "I assumed as much," I said, standing. "I'll expect your formal clearance documents by Friday. If I don't receive them, or if any language implies restriction, I'll take this to the press and the patent board simultaneously." Madison stood as well, trying to salvage the moment. "Cole, let's not make this adversarial. You've done incredible work here." "I know," I said, picking up the notebook. "And that's why I'm not staying." As I walked out of HR, a few employees glanced up from their desks. Some recognized me. A few even gave tentative waves. I nodded, but didn't stop. I wasn't part of this place anymore. I had already peeled away from its gravity. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. "Julian." Heard from someone inside. They're rattled. "Everything okay?" I typed back, "More than okay." They didn't read the fine print. I did. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, then. "Ready to announce you to the Redwood team this week. Prepping press if you're comfortable." I paused before replying. Press meant visibility. Visibility meant retaliation from the Wren machine. But it also meant freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to be the ghost behind someone else's empire. Do it. That afternoon, I returned home and pulled out a manila folder of old blueprints, system ideas I had shelved over the years because I knew Westmere wouldn't understand them. Predictive warehouse clustering, drone-based priority fulfillment, multi-node regional staging for disaster logistics. They weren't just ideas. They were future-proofing. And now, they were mine to shape. Celia came home late. She didn't mention the dinner. Didn't ask how my offboarding went. Just went straight to the bedroom, as if the air between us wasn't thick with decisions she had already made in silence. I didn't chase her. Didn't ask for her side. Some things don't need to be screamed to be understood. That night, I scanned the entire notebook, page by page, into a private cloud vault. I uploaded it to Redwood's secure drive as well. Julian's tech lead pinged me in the chat room 20 minutes later. "This is gold. We're integrating your freight tiering system immediately." I sat back, staring at the screen. For the first time in a long while, my name was going to be on something that mattered. Not in footnotes, not in whispered praise, but bold, public, unapologetic. Westmere built its reputation on borrowed innovation, and they assumed the man who built it wouldn't notice. They assumed wrong. They gave me an office with a view. Not one of those ego-driven glass boxes at the top of a tower, but something smarter, corner of the 4th floor at Redwood's operations wing, where I could see the warehouse grids, the routing docks, the heartbeat of the company. Julian knew I didn't want a palace. I wanted proximity to the system. I wanted to watch the thing breathe. My title was Lead Architect of Logistics Innovation, but it might as well have Red Builder of the Future. We launched Project Horizon within the first month. Clean rollout. No red tape. Redwood's internal engineers were lean, hungry, and brilliant. I fed them my system schematics, and they translated code like poetry. We didn't need to ask permission. There were no 12-person committees second-guessing every line of implementation. No legacy weight slowing us down. Everything I'd wanted Westmere to do years ago, we did in weeks. Horizon wasn't just a tool, it was a shift. A fully adaptive, predictive delivery management engine. Real-time response to traffic, warehouse delays, weather disruptions. Machine learning forecasted shipping demand patterns with frightening precision. Clients didn't just notice, they were stunned. Within 3 weeks, our client support center started receiving emails that all read the same way. "How are you doing this?" And I didn't hide the answer, because the world needed to know. We sent out a press release. Julian's team drafted it, but I added the closing line myself. Redwood Logistics is proud to announce Project Horizon, designed and led by Cole Wren, to redefine what efficient, ethical, and intelligent logistics looks like in the 21st century. For the first time in my career, my name was tied to my work publicly. I didn't hide behind acronyms or Wren Holdings letterhead. I stood in the light, and Westmere noticed. The first account we flipped was Callahan Industrial, medium size, high volume, distribution heavy. They called us after 1 week of Horizon's public launch. They'd been with Westmere for 8 years, but were suddenly hemorrhaging delays and upcharges. We showed them how Horizon could cut their transit time by 32%, costs by 19%, and waste by half. They signed within 48 hours. Next was Everway. Then Kelby Freight. Then Easton International. Easton was the real strike. Douglas had once called Easton the Diamond Vein, the account that paid bonuses across 3 departments and funded Celia's first expansion office. I remember the way he spoke about it at dinner one year, glass raised, saying, "No matter what happens, we'll always have Easton." Until they didn't. Julian told me about it on a Tuesday morning. Walked into my office holding a coffee I hadn't asked for, placed it gently on my desk, and said, "You might want to sit." "I am sitting," I said, suspicious. "Easton just terminated their Westmere contract," he replied. "Signed with us 5 minutes ago. It's done." I stared at him, not in disbelief, but in confirmation. The shift had begun. "We onboard them next week," Julian added. "They want a custom build-out of Horizon. You lead that." My phone buzzed 15 minutes later. A number I hadn't seen in weeks. Douglas. I didn't answer. Then, a message. From Celia. "We need to talk." About what's happening. About Easton. I stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen pulsing in my hand like a warning light. There was a time, not long ago, when a text from her would have shifted my whole day. When I would have dropped meetings, rescheduled calls, driven across the city just to sit next to her. But now? Her silence at that boardroom table echoed louder than her message ever could. And silence has a memory. When it doesn't let go of easily. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down to the ops bay, stood at the balcony overlooking the logistics floor, and watched the team work. I saw it all, the numbers being punched into Horizon's live dashboard, the forecast painting dynamic arcs across wall-sized displays. Delivery lanes glowing in real time, warehouses syncing in a harmony I'd dreamed of for years. And every screen bore one quiet watermark at the bottom right, built with Horizon, by Colren. I knew what Westmere was doing behind the scenes. They were scrambling, trying to find ways to patch the holes without naming them, trying to reverse engineer what they didn't understand, trying to explain to investors why their delivery times were climbing while ours were dropping. They didn't know it yet, but this was just the first blow, because Horizon was still evolving. We were already developing Horizon Stream, a live client-side dashboard that would let partners see projected bottlenecks hours in advance. Transparent data. No more reactive firefighting. Just clarity. Something Westmere had never believed in. Julian called a leadership meeting the next day. 3 weeks in, he told the room, and Redwood is seeing operational metrics we projected for Q4. That's the Colren effect. I didn't smile at the compliment. I didn't need it. I hadn't come here for applause. I came here for air. And finally, I could breathe. That night, I drove home and past Westmere's downtown tower, lit up and sterile as always. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. Not with bitterness, with closure. I had spent years giving everything to a building that never once gave anything back. Now, I was building my own. And this? This was only the first strike. It was a Friday when the envelope landed on my desk. Thick, gold-trimmed, sealed with Westmere's corporate stamp like it was an invitation to a ball. Inside, a formal cease and desist letter, the first shot fired from Douglas's war chest. The accusation? Intellectual property theft. They claimed Horizon was derived from proprietary Westmere technology developed under my tenure. I sat back in my chair, holding the letter like it was a joke someone forgot to laugh at. Redwood's legal team gathered in my office within the hour. Julian, Regina from our side, no relation to Westmere's former counsel, and 2 sharp young associates who could have been partners at any firm in New York if they wanted to be. Julian read the first few lines aloud and let out a breath between amusement and irritation. "They're playing checkers," he muttered. "You're 10 moves ahead on a chessboard. I told you this might come," I said. "You also told me you documented everything." I slid a thick folder across the table, labeled Asset Authorship Ledger. Inside were printed, notarized records, dated logs of development, version histories, screenshots of source code from my personal server, all timestamped, email threads, cloud backup history, even handwritten journal entries with parallel build timelines. Every bit of Horizon's DNA was created off-site, off-hours, and off-books. Julian opened a second envelope I handed him, Westmere's original employment agreement with me, highlighted sections showing the glaring absence of an IP clause. No non-compete. No work for hire language. Nothing. "Jesus," one of the lawyers whispered, flipping through the contents like she was holding proof of a royal scandal. "That's not even the best part," I said, opening my laptop. I tapped into the backup drive and pulled up my email archive. These are all the times I offered to formally license my systems to them. Julian raised an eyebrow. They declined. They ignored me, or delayed the conversation. He turned to the team. That makes this willful negligence, not just a civil dispute. We filed our response within 48 hours, an airtight, heavily footnoted rebuttal with counterclaims of attempted suppression, false allegations, and malicious interference. We didn't just defend ourselves. We went for the throat. The court date was expedited, likely because of the noise surrounding Horizon's success. Business publications had already started speculating on Westmere's plummeting market share. The lawsuit only confirmed what people were whispering. Westmere was in trouble. Celia didn't reach out. Douglas didn't either. But their silence made it clear they were betting on intimidation. They thought dragging me to court would shake Redwood's confidence, maybe even stall our momentum. But I didn't flinch, because I knew something Douglas never understood. When you build something with your own hands, every line of code, every diagram, every late-night revision, it doesn't belong to anyone else, especially not the man who laughed in your face for asking to be valued. We stepped into court on a gray morning. I wore a charcoal suit, no tie. Julian flanked me on one side. Our counsel walked tall, shoulders squared. Across the aisle, Douglas sat stiffly in a bespoke pinstripe suit, surrounded by his own legal phalanx. His expression was unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. The proceedings started calmly enough. Westmere's attorney presented the claim with all the practiced venom of a man used to bullying competitors into settlements. He spoke about corporate betrayal, about unauthorized use of proprietary systems, and about ethical obligations ignored. Then our side began. Regina approached the bench and started unpacking, page by page, a narrative not of betrayal, but of meticulous authorship. Every submission was dated, every system traceable to personal time and personal resources. She read from my emails. Displayed side-by-side comparisons of Horizon and Westmere's legacy software, showing clearly that they were not only different in core architecture, but that Westmere's version was technically inferior. Then she turned to the bench and said, "Your Honor, I direct your attention to Exhibit 29, an internal Westmere email where Mr. Wren's proposal for licensing was ignored. They had the opportunity to legally acquire this system. They chose not to. Their oversight does not entitle them to ownership after the fact." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no tolerance for ego, leaned forward. "Let me clarify. You're stating that the defendant repeatedly offered to license his independent work to the plaintiff and was dismissed?" "Yes, Your Honor," Regina replied. "And we have the documented proof." The judge looked toward Westmere's side. "And is that claim disputed?" Their counsel stammered, deflecting toward vague employment loyalty language. The judge cut him off. "Not good enough. If you had no legal contract, no written agreement of IP transfer, and you declined to pursue ownership when offered the opportunity, you cannot claim theft. That's not how intellectual property works." Douglas shifted in his seat. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Wren, you may want to rethink your approach to innovation. Dismissing it doesn't mean you own it." She dismissed the case before lunch. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters waited, cameras ready. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Julian issued a simple statement on behalf of Redwood. "We believe in honoring innovation, not appropriating it." Today's ruling affirms that belief. News of the court loss spread like fire through the industry. Westmere's investors began pulling out. Clients asked questions. Internal memos leaked. Rumors of department freezes and delayed bonuses swirled. They tried to contain it. But you can't put the pieces back once people see the cracks. I sat at my desk that night, watching the press coverage play on mute. My phone buzzed again, this time from Celia. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I stared at it, emotionless. Then I replied, "I didn't. I just stopped letting you all take what wasn't yours." She didn't respond. I closed my laptop and turned off the lights. Redwood was quiet, humming with the software of servers and distant conversations. It felt like home, like possibility, like breath. They thought the lawsuit would bury me, but it only confirmed what I already knew. They never owned me. It started with a whisper, not a dramatic headline, not a televised apology. Just a quiet rumor, a spreadsheet leaked from inside Westmere showing 23% of their contracts up for renegotiation, and not a single new acquisition in 3 months. Then the layoffs began. At first, They trimmed the edges. Regional sales consultants. Mid-level analysts. But I knew the pattern. You don't cut out your outer shell unless the rot has already eaten through the center. Redwood's acquisition strategy wasn't driven by revenge. It was a rescue mission. We weren't looking to humiliate Westmere. That part had already been done by their arrogance. We were looking for talent they thought disposable. I called it Operation Phoenix. We identified the best of Westmere's internal minds, the quiet thinkers, the overlooked creators, the problem solvers buried under bureaucracy. People like Marcia Dean. I still remember her from my first year at Westmere, a senior analyst who taught me the logistics modeling software on my second week. While Douglas barked down directives and took credit for strategies I'd spent nights building, Marcia pulled me aside during coffee breaks and said, "Never underestimate the value of clean data and quiet patience." She was the best mind in that building. Westmere demoted her 2 years ago, something about restructuring. Now, she sat across from me at Redwood's R&D floor, her glasses fogged from excitement, her fingers already dragging models into our development environment like she'd never left. "You were always the one to watch," she said as we shook hands. "But now you're the one to follow." Oscar came next, the savant in delivery optimization who once shaved 30 hours off a cross-regional shipping map and never even got a thank you email. Douglas couldn't stand how fast his mind moved. Oscar didn't care until they cut his bonus during a budget neutralization quarter. We brought him in as Director of Logistics Strategy. "About time someone understood that traffic patterns are emotional," he said. "Cities breathe, and shipping routes need to learn how to breathe with them." Within a month, Redwood's systems ran smoother than I'd ever imagined. Our warehouse-to-dock times dropped below 12 minutes. Carrier coordination was so seamless that clients began sending us thank you notes with their payments. Not emails. Notes. Handwritten ones. And Westmere? They kept bleeding. By Q2, they'd lost 5 more clients, some to Redwood, some just gone. Their quarterly revenue dipped so low that whispers of restructuring turned into full-volume alarm bells. The layoffs hit C-level next. Their CIO resigned. Their COO retired. Regina Hahn, their general counsel, disappeared from the website entirely. I didn't celebrate that one. She had been part of the problem, sure, but she was also someone who once told me, "You've got something special, Cole. Don't let the suits dilute it." Maybe she meant it. Maybe she just saw the storm coming. The final blow came when their creditors stepped in. Their stock tanked to under $7, a number that once would have triggered a family meeting in the Wren household. But now, it triggered fire sales. Panic. Emails from their board to investors using words like liquidity event and unforeseen market volatility. It was all avoidable. I didn't gloat. Not really. I didn't post interviews or join panels to dissect their fall. I didn't give quotes about poetic justice. I didn't need to. The press said everything for me. Redwood's horizon redefines freight efficiency. Cole Wren, from family scapegoat to logistics visionary. The quiet genius who took down an empire he built. But the moment that settled it all, the moment that put everything into focus, was the day Redwood acquired Westmere's old headquarters. It was a fire sale auction. Julian didn't even tell me we were bidding until after we won. I stood in front of the building on 51st and Elridge, looking up at its glass-paneled facade, the same panels I used to walk beneath every morning wondering if I'd ever be more than a shadow in that place. Now it was empty. Well, almost. When the keys were officially turned over, Julian handed them to me with a half-smile. "You built this once," he said. "Figure it's only right you decide what to do with it." I walked those halls slowly. The lobby was still marble, still cold. The reception desk still bore the Wren family crest, subtle but present. The conference rooms still held the ghosts of 1,000 dismissals, 1,000 smirks, 1,000 silences that told me I didn't belong. But I wasn't here to haunt this place. I was here to bury it. The executive suite, Douglas's old office, was still intact. Same leather chairs, same walnut desk. I ran my hand across the surface, remembering all the times I'd stood across from it, pitching solutions that were too radical, too expensive, not in alignment with the Wren legacy. This desk had never once held an original thought. It had only sat in the reflection of other people's work. I didn't take the office. I didn't even keep the furniture. We cleared the top floor and turned it into an open-air design space, a think tank with live collaboration screens, sandbox servers, and ambient lighting meant to keep ideas flowing. And I gave the best corner spot, floor-to-ceiling view, private alcove, built-in espresso bar, to Marcia. Because power shouldn't be hoarded. It should be shared. The rest of the building followed suit. We called it Redwood Annex Apartments from our downtown campus, slowly migrated over. Not for optics, but because the bones of the place were strong. It had just been built on the wrong foundation before. No, it served something real. We left the Wren crest on the lobby floor intentionally, but we covered it in glass and laid a steel plaque over it with 4 words etched deep: "Respect is not inherited." The press asked if I wanted to speak on the acquisition. I declined. I let the building speak for itself. That night, after the final department moved in, I stood in the old boardroom. The same one where Douglas laughed at me, where Celia stared down at her fork and said nothing. I looked around and saw new faces. My team, collaborators, dreamers. No silence, no smirks, just fire. And as I stood there, hand resting on the table that once made me feel small, I whispered something, not to anyone in the room, but to the man I used to be. You made it out. And I had. Westmere didn't collapse because of me. It collapsed because it never knew how to hold the people who carried it. All I did was let go. He showed up without warning. No appointment, no email, no assistant calling ahead. Just walked through Redwood's glass front doors in a suit that looked slept in, the shoulders wrinkled, the lapel curled like it had seen too many anxious hands. Security called me immediately. I was reviewing a beta interface for Horizon Stream when my phone lit up with a single message. Douglas Wren is in the lobby. Alone. Says he just wants a word. For a moment, I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. Not since the family dinner that ended everything. Not since the lawsuit. Not since Redwood bought the building he once called his kingdom. I wasn't even sure what I'd say if I saw him. Part of me didn't want to say anything. Another part. The builder in me, the man who believed in closure as much as strategy, knew I had to. I messaged back. Let him in. One-on-one only. Bring him to Conference 6B. No cameras. 6B was one of the smaller glass-paneled rooms on the 3rd floor. Clean, modern, just enough space for hard truth without the theater of an audience. When I walked in, Douglas was already seated, hands clasped on the table, shoulders slouched like something in him had collapsed, and he hadn't figured out how to stand it back up. He looked older. Not in the natural way. This wasn't time. This was defeat. The circles under his eyes weren't from age. They were from months of losing things he thought were his by birthright. I took the seat across from him without offering a handshake. He looked at me, eyes sunken but clear. You destroyed my company, he said quietly. The words hung there, trembling in the space between us. I didn't flinch. No, I said. You did that. I just stopped enabling you. He blinked slowly. No denial. No immediate defense. Just a long breath, the kind someone takes when they know the ground has shifted permanently beneath them. I underestimated you, he said. You didn't see me at all, I corrected. You saw an asset. A son-in-law. Someone easy to contain. He nodded once, almost like he'd rehearsed the agreement. I didn't think you had it in you. That made me laugh, just once, under my breath. You mean you didn't think I'd do it without you? You thought I needed the Wren name, that I was lucky to be tolerated at your table. He winced, but didn't argue. There was a long silence, the kind that usually ends with someone standing up and walking out. But Douglas stayed seated. I came here because I have nothing left to offer anyone, he said. I waited. He looked up at me, voice thin. No job, no board seat, not even a chair on a foundation committee. No one returns my calls. They say I'm radioactive. That's what happens when your only currency is control, I said. And you lose it. He pressed his lips together. His hands gripped each other tighter on the table. Celia left, he added quietly, like that piece still shocked him. I didn't react. I had heard. Through mutual acquaintances, whispers at events, and eventually through the quiet disappearance of her name from Westmere's legal transition notices. Celia had stayed with him through the worst of it, defended him during the lawsuit, doubled down on the family's image, until the walls completely fell. When Redwood hired a forensic auditor to go through Westmere's leftover accounts, we discovered millions in unpaid vendor obligations and off-the-book transactions linked to board members. I never made any of it public, but the stink had already spread. Douglas leaned forward now, his voice lower. Is there anything left for me? At Redwood? With you. There it was. I kept my face still. Measured. You're asking for a job? I said. I'm asking for a place, he whispered. The man who once laughed at me for requesting a raise. Who silenced me at every meeting. Who watched as his daughter stared through me at boardroom tables. Now sitting across from me in my company, asking for a foothold. I built everything, he said, too quickly. That name meant something. No, I said. It didn't. It was a shadow people stood under because they had nowhere else to go. You didn't build people. You used them. He looked down, ashamed or pretending to be. I couldn't tell anymore. He had always been so good at wearing the face the room needed. I'm not looking for revenge, I told him. And I'm not interested in humiliating you. That's why I never gave interviews. That's why I never used your name in any public statement. But you and I both know, if I let you step into this place now, I undo everything we've built. I'm not asking for an office, he said. Just something. Anything. I stood. Douglas, your name never respected mine. Now mine outranks yours. That's not revenge. That's balance. That's what happens when silence becomes strategy. His shoulders sagged. I walked to the door and held it open. That's the last truth I have for you, I said. And the only one I owe you. He didn't speak again. He just stood slowly, gathered his coat, and left. I watched him walk through the building, the one he once ruled, now full of people who didn't recognize him. No one paused. No one greeted him. He passed like a ghost, drifting through the halls of a legacy he no longer belonged to. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, I stood there for a while, hands still on the handle. That was the last time I saw Douglas Wren, and the only time I ever saw him small. 1 year later, I stood at the center of a room I never imagined being invited into, let alone celebrated in. The Innovator of the Year ceremony was hosted at the Grand Meridian in Midtown, a place more accustomed to hosting heads of state than logistics nerds like me. But tonight, the room sparkled under crystal chandeliers, and the crowd wasn't made up of silver-tongued CEOs trying to out-toast each other. It was thinkers, engineers, builders, founders, people who knew the value of dirty hands and sleepless nights. When my name was called, the applause felt different than anything I'd ever known. It wasn't polite. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't coaxed by politics or last names or marriage ties. It was real, earned. And I felt every second of it as I walked toward the stage. I paused at the podium, scanning the crowd. No one from the Wren family was in the room. Not Celia. Not Douglas. Not a cousin or niece or distant relative trying to save face. That part of my story had finally ended. What remained were faces I respected, my team at Redwood, new industry leaders, and the former misfits we had built something unshakable with. I didn't speak long. I spent years thinking my worth was something I had to prove to people who refused to see it. I began. I thought if I worked harder, stayed quiet, didn't ask for too much, I'd eventually earn respect. That someone would hand me the keys to the door I kept trying to knock down. But doors built by other people will always come with locks you weren't meant to open. I paused, watching a few heads nod. I built Project Horizon out of necessity, but I built Redwood out of defiance. And now I know, respect isn't given to those who wait patiently at the table. It's earned by those who build their own. The applause was loud, but I barely heard it. I walked off stage feeling weightless, lighter than I had in years. Not because I won something, but because I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist in my own power. That realization stayed with me as I moved through the after-event conversations, handshakes, flashes of cameras, congratulations from strangers who knew me only by headlines and outcomes. They didn't know the long nights, the silence, the ache of a marriage that had already ended long before I left. But they didn't have to. That wasn't the legacy I wanted to carry. Later, as I slipped out onto the balcony to escape the noise, I found myself staring at the skyline. A sea of lit windows and moving light, the very machinery I once believed I had to fight to survive. Now, I was part of it. I'd reshaped it. That's when she approached. A young woman, maybe mid-20s. Clipboard under her arm, eyes hesitant but curious. She wasn't dressed like press. She had the look of someone who wasn't sure she belonged in the room but showed up anyway. "Excuse me, Mr. Wren?" I turned. "Just Cole," I said. She nodded. "Sorry, I work in supply chain modeling. Entry level. This is my first time at one of these events." "Then you're in the right place," I said. "Because everyone here was entry level once. They just don't always admit it." She smiled, then swallowed, hesitating again. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." Her voice was quiet. How do you know when it's time to stop being loyal? That question hit harder than I expected, not because it surprised me, but because I had asked it so many times myself. In silence, in doubt, in the moments when I still believed staying meant strength, I looked her in the eyes and said, "When loyalty starts costing you your identity." She blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "And what if they call you ungrateful? Then you know you've stopped being disposable." She smiled, but there were tears building in the corners of her eyes. I knew that looked too well. I didn't ask what her story was. I didn't need to. She thanked me and left. Not in a rush, just with a little more certainty in her step. And that was it. No thunder, no finale, just a quiet echo of what I had lived through. A new generation asking the same questions I once carried like weights. Only now, someone like me was there to answer them. The next morning, I returned to Redwood as usual. No fanfare, no press waiting outside. Just the smell of coffee brewing in the shared kitchen, the buzz of code humming through servers, the sound of real work happening. My kind of music. Marcia was already in her corner office, now officially named the Phoenix Suite by the team. Oscar was pacing the corridor near R&D, tossing out ideas for the beta rollout of Horizon Stream. Everyone was busy building, still hungry, still proud. That afternoon, I walked the halls of Redwood Annex, the same building Douglas once owned, once ruled from with silence and inherited confidence. Now it was humming with laughter, motion, collaboration. Not one trace of the old regime remained. Even the gold-framed portraits of Ren executives had been replaced with digital panels displaying team accomplishments. A rotating feed of impact, not ego. I paused near the entrance where we'd mounted the plaque. Respect is not inherited. People took selfies with it now. Visitors asked about its meaning. Interns told me it made them feel seen. And me? I felt finished. Not done, but finished. That wound, the one I'd carried for so long. The ache of being invisible in a room I helped build, that wound had finally closed. I left the office a little early that day. No destination in mind. Just the feeling of air against my face as I walked through the city. This time, I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't proving anything. I was just free. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, a glass of quiet scotch in hand, thinking back to the man who once asked for a 10% raise and got laughed out of a room. That man didn't disappear. He evolved. They tried to make me feel small. They tried to make me grateful for scraps. They tried to erase my name from the story I wrote. But here I was. Not a whisper behind a curtain. Not a signature buried beneath someone else's crest. A name. Carved, spoken, respected. Mine. And for the first time, it meant something.